Welcome to another episode of Pod of the Gaps, the podcast which seeks to plug the gaps between the church and the culture. My name is Aaron Edwards, and I am not joined, sadly, today by the Dr. Andy Bannister because he has had a crazy pipe leak last minute that he told me about just as we're about to kind of come online today. So I think he's, some might say he's ducking out of it, because he doesn't really want to go toe to toe with Bob the Builder, our guest today. But who knows? We'll see. But it's a shame not to be with Andy, because he, of course, has a great background in Muslim apologetics, and we have with us today Bob the Builder and or Bob of Speaker's Corner, as you might know him. We've mentioned him once or twice on the show before, particularly in our episode on winsomeness, which I think was a year or so ago. But here we are with Bob here, and it will be great to chat to you, Bob. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thanks to feed the God. So yes, I'm very good. Life is treating me well, and I thank God for it. And
Yeah.
it's a pleasure to be here. It's been a long time in
Yeah.
coming.
It has, yeah, that's right. Yeah, we've been trying to get you on for a while, but thankfully, we finally found the date. But then, of course, our resident Muslim apologist can't even be here, which is a real shame. I think clearly in the Lord's providence that pipe burst for some other reasons. So he'll have to listen from
Just
afar.
to clear the stage for me, you see, so I have no
That's
contradicting
it.
voices.
Yeah, that's right. This podcast ain't big enough for the two of us. That's right. Yeah, that's so good. Well, but really, yeah, really good to have you on. And as I said, I first came across your work um, last year, actually at the time when I was the week that I was suspended from Cliff College for
Mm,
my salty tweet, and was eventually fired for. But it was interesting that the amount of flack I was getting at the time from Christians was around the tone of things and the fact that you shouldn't take this combative stance. And of course, this is something that you're quite well known
mm.
for taking a more combative stance. But before, and we'll get into some of those things, about what that looks like, and we'll hopefully play a little clip to give our listeners and a kind of sense of what we're talking about with the work that you're doing in terms of ministry to Muslims on the front line. But I guess I thought, just to open it out, if you could maybe expand a little bit on what you see as the key challenges for reaching Muslims in our time, especially in the West, perhaps even especially in the UK, but it could be the West in general. What do you see as the key challenges that we face today?
That we have a weak political culture, that
Mm,
that liberal society is increasingly clamping down on any speech that could be considered hateful,
mm,
any speech that could be considered stirring up communal kind of tensions, and that our liberal culture doesn't see any kind of existential threat
mm,
coming from Islam. And
mm,
the result of that is that we're increasingly seeing clampdowns on free speech. On the 1st of April, a law is going to be passed by Hamza Yousaf's SNP government, which will codify the idea that if your speech is considered to be hateful by someone else, you could be
mm,
prosecuted for it and spend
mm,
time in jail. Now, the
mm,
problem with that is that, as you probably already know, within the Islamic
mm,
community, they're incredibly sensitive to
mm,
criticism, even criticism that emerges from evidential texts that are
mm,
authoritative from within their own community. So if you use the
mm,
hadiths or you use the Qur'an to demonstrate that Islam permits slavery, permits abortion, permits
mm,
polygamy, permits lying,
mhm,
permits child marriage, sex with
mm,
children.
mm,
If you use all of these things as a criticism,
mm,
Muslims often get deeply offended at that because
mm.
they're coming from an honor culture, and
Yeah.
in their honor culture, they must defend the honor of Muhammad. And
Mm,
so that means that it's not based upon any reasoned argument. It's about defending honor,
mm, mm,
even if you're defending something irrational.
mhm,
And unfortunately, liberal governments of the West are increasingly, for their own political reasons,
mm.
seeking to clamp down on freedom of speech.
Yeah.
I would say that is the principal
Mm.
challenge that we face is losing
So you,
freedom of speech, but it's
so
not
you'd
the only
actually, yeah.
challenge.
So you'd say actually would you say the greater challenge is coming from the progressive approach to hate speech rather than from Islam? Although you do say, of course, that Islam, there are many Muslims who actually feel
Yeah.
yeah,
So
impervious to criticism.
so your question, what's the greatest challenge to reaching
Mm.
Muslims?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
the greatest challenge to reaching Muslims will be the introduction of an Islamic blasphemy law by the back door.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
Hamza Yusuf, a practicing
yeah,
Muslim, is
yeah.
introducing a law that will definitely be weaponized against anyone making criticisms of Islam. Keir
Mm,
Starmer
mm,
and the Labour Party have it in their manifesto to make to make Islamophobia a crime, and the
mm,
definition of Islamophobia is any attack upon
mm.
Muslimness.
Yeah,
Now, that's an all-encompassing
yeah,
term. If I
yeah.
criticize the burqa as suppressing women, or I criticize Islamic law around wife beating, which
Hmm.
is permitted inside the Quran, then that law could be used against me. And this is a great problem. This is
Yeah.
something that the church needs to wake up to because it's going
Mm,
to impact us all in
mm,
lots of different ways. But in my
mm,
field, this is how it might
mm.
impact me.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and certainly the way the kind of approach that you'll take in terms of taking a more forthright stance against Islam as an ideology, really, because I guess there are many Christians who will attempt other modes of engagement with even apologetic engagement, but especially just in terms of reaching Muslims in general
Hmm.
in our multicultural era. It gets tied up with lots of other issues, doesn't it? Because there's this sense in which we want to build friendships with people, which of course is a good thing, and you do want to treat people as not dehumanize other people, which is probably what the people who cry Islamophobia are worried about, that they're being dehumanized as a result. But I think I'm with you absolutely that this is a huge threat to the ability to even attempt to convert somebody else, because we've had recently we were discussing on the podcast the Church of England's embarrassment about their previous uh, missionary endeavors in Africa,
Hmm.
where they necessarily had to dismantle aspects of the indigenous religion because they were idolatrous and wrong, and Christianity needed to be asserted. But people are almost worried and embarrassed about that now, so they wouldn't want to go to a Muslim and say, "This is wrong. What you believe is wrong. Wife beating is wrong. If even if your holy scriptures command it or encourage it." In whatever, however many caveats you want to put around it, that's going to be a problem, and we need to be able to challenge that and actually assert a better claim and a claim to truth and show that in its fullness. But many Christians are more content, it seems, to connect with Muslims in general, but the pushing over the line to actually challenge them becomes more difficult. Have you experienced that amongst other Christians as a sort of reticence to challenge?
Yeah, I think amongst many Christians. So just sort of, building on what you said about the Church of England's embarrassment about its
Mm,
missionary efforts in Africa.
mm,
Like that, we've got to be clear that the people that are feeling that embarrassment are of a dubious, questionable Christian spirituality. It
mhm,
seems to me that their religion really is the God of self, and
mhm,
the religion and the cultural religion
mm.
is a civic Christianity for them,
Yeah, yeah,
which serves the political means of the state rather than serving our Lord Jesus Christ.
yeah.
But even amongst faithful, true believing Christians, um, there's a reticence for conflict, and there's
Mm,
reticence for confrontation. And the reason for that, I think, is because what has informed a lot of modern Christianity is the kind of civic religion that was formed in the Enlightenment and
mhm,
during the Enlightenment, which is a religion that's on the back burner, that's low heat, low intensity
mhm,
religion,
mhm,
and that is considered to be a private matter.
mhm,
And so, even though Christians are throwing off these attitudes now, thanks be to God, a lot of that still remains. A lot of that
mhm,
still kind of is present. And I think
mhm,
some of it is connected to socioeconomic reasons. A lot of Christians
mhm,
are very comfortable middle class people with nice jobs, nice careers, and being the awkward one, being the square peg that won't go into the round hole. That's not something that does well to advance your career. And a lot of Christians, for the sake of self-preservation, don't want to get their hands mucky. And so they create theologies and missiological approaches that fit their nice, comfortable way of doing things. So an example of that would be the Alpha Course by Nicky Gumbel and Holy Trinity Brompton. Wonderful way to reach middle-class people. Dinner parties, conversation over a video. It imbibes the middle-class attitude towards things. It's very non-confrontational. It's not really about trying to win arguments. It's just about making presentation, and then people just talk about it openly. Whereas Islam, and particularly Muslims in this country, most of them are working class. Most of them come from Pakistan. And in Pakistan, there's no shyness around getting into conflict. It's a country that needs to learn to have less conflict because it's tearing itself to pieces because it can't have enough conflict, if you see what I'm saying. And Christians are being persecuted terribly there. And so those attitudes are imbibed within the Muslim community. It's much more conflictual. The Qur'an says, that war is prescribed upon you, and it's possible that you might dislike something that's good for you, which is a very kind of Nietzschean, we would almost call it national socialist attitude. The war is good. So when you've got those two things combined, someone like me, I cut against the grain because I don't interpret the faith from a middle class perspective, so I don't interpret it as being necessarily whimsical or winsome, and I don't try to sugarcoat things. And I speak like a working class guy from a working class neighborhood who's just happened to have got a degree and can articulate himself. And that cuts against the grain of churchianity in England. So people take umbrage at my confrontational approach.
They do indeed, and the phrase, churchianity. I don't know if you read Joe Boots' little thing on that. Christianity or churchianity is a good little thing, and a little booklet that Christian Concern put out, where he's saying this is part of the issue, that we've created a system in which we want to create programs in the church and keep people going to those programs, and in order to do that, you can't actually do the kind of mission that requires being on the front line and confronting, especially when the game changes and the temperature changes, and suddenly we're in what Aaron Wren has called the negative world, where it's a net negative to be a Christian. It's no longer neutral, certainly not positive to be a Christian. It doesn't give you positive social cachet. And it's not neutral in the sense of, well, that's just a neutral ground of persuasion. We're actually under attack significantly. And it's usually the middle class folks in the church who like to say, oh, don't be so alarmist. It's all fine. Don't over exaggerate. Look, the Alpha Course has still got numbers running on it. It's still going all right. When in reality, as you say, it is very much a middle class approach, which is a helpful thing. My own father was saved through the Alpha Course. I did an Alpha Course after I got saved, and it was helpful. But I think it actually plays into this civic, culturally Christian background. So you do actually already go in thinking that you're kind of semi-Christianized because you're British or something, because that's a lot of people go there because with some knowledge of Christianity, and it begins, that's why it used to begin with the session, is Christianity boring, untrue, or irrelevant? Well, actually, if you're going today, that's not the first question on the average non-Christian's lips. Is Christianity boring, untrue, or irrelevant? It's more like, is there a God? Is there any meaning to my life? Or should I do this? Or should I believe this or this? It's not actually, what do I think about Christianity? That already assumes a kind of inherited sense of Christianity. And it would do, because that's the era in which Nicky Gumbel was pioneering the Alpha Course and all the good it's done. But as you say, it has created a kind of hashtag Alpha Christianity, where we like to have our Christianity in and through dinner parties. And that brings a certain politeness, which
we've replaced
the other approaches.
We've replaced in our fellowships the sense of being the people of God, God's holy priests, God's royal nation, God's people set apart, people of the new covenant. We've put that aside and we've replaced it with programs. We've replaced it with alpha courses and Christianity Explored and Bible studies on a Wednesday and, come to this course, come to that course, come to this program, come to that program. But the problem is if you create your fellowship around the idea of sustaining programs, rather than building up and living out organically the people of God, you limit what you can do. Also, there's an economic problem for the fellowships, which is that a lot of pastors, a lot of priests, they make their living at their congregations, obviously, which is which is a biblical principle. There's nothing wrong with that. But what that results in is a lot of church leaders don't want to offend members of their congregation. Because if they do, they lose members, and if they lose members, they lose income, and then their church can do less. And this creates a timidity amongst many fellowships.
Absolutely.
I happen to know that I recently got banned from a church in Oxford, quite a strong and successful church in Oxford, that was quite won over to my confrontational style of evangelism. And I was invited to give a sermon, and granted, it wasn't the best sermon it's not the best sermon that I've ever given or that has ever been preached. I'm not a natural sermonizer, and I now understand how sermon series are created. It's basically a pastor had too much info that he wanted to give in one session, and now he's had to turn it into a series, right? So I hardly got through any of my content. But in the course of studying my content, the question of veiling of sisters came up. And I mentioned that I think that the biblical case is that women should veil their heads when they pray or prophesy. And that got me banned from the church. They don't talk to me anymore. So the point is that if you upset your congregation, there's a cost. And so lots of pastors don't want to ask their congregation to do anything that actually involves real sacrifice and real loss.
And it's so true. There's so much I could say on that. You'll get me on a tangent about feminism invading the church in a minute, but actually, to tie it to the Muslim thing, even things like there are things in scripture that we're embarrassed by. This is why I'm kind of advocating the need to be shamelessly biblical, because at just the time when we need all of these quite profound truths in scripture, which speak to humanity at a very deep level and the differences between male and female. And indeed, that might help us with reaching Muslims who do, of course, care about. There are bridges that one could build with some Islamic beliefs whilst we dismantle, and we say this is completely incorrect. But we do believe, by the way, Muslims, in the difference between men and women. God actually does speak about this quite significantly throughout scripture. Look at head coverings. Yes, we don't see women in the way that you see women, but we do see that there is appropriate order. But most churches today are kind of embarrassed by this, and so we sort of hide it away. And we've only been hiding it away for it's certainly for less than a century that's been a really embarrassing thing that you never really talk about. And you think that's just dubious because, however strange that may seem to people, most of the Christians in history would see us as the strange ones. But anyway, I won't go to a huge tangent on that. What I'd like to do at this point is, because people may be going, what is this confrontational style? Go on, jump in. As I find this clip. Go on.
So for instance, one of the Dawagandists' key lines of attack against Christianity is that you Christians are not serious about your religion. And they use these compromised civic liberal Christians as their examples to demonstrate that. It's how they bounced. It's one of the at least prima facie reasons given by Andrew Tate as to why he converted to Islam.
Of course.
Now, obviously, there's all kinds of questions you could ask around Andrew Tate about whether he's got genuine motives or not. But at least to a public face, he says that one of the reasons why he became a Muslim is because Christians don't take their religion seriously, because he looks at trans activism from the pulpit and gay activism from the pulpit, and he just thinks, well, anyone who reads the Bible can see that that's unbiblical. And so these churches are embarrassing the gospel. They're causing scandal to people and causing them to stumble. And so a deeply rooted seriousness amongst Christians about our faith and a real deep historical conviction and identity about what it is to be a Christian is one of the absolutely necessary tools, one of the necessary positions for us to take if we want to reach Muslims and be effective in doing so. Is they've got to look at us and think that we're as committed and as serious about our faith as they are about theirs.
Absolutely. No, completely agree. My own, occasional interactions with Muslims in evangelistic contexts on the street has been, you're straight into a rational debate, obviously about the sources of authority, but at the same time, it does come down to as well that the lack of respect they'll have for Christians when they observe Western culture at large. I think you guys don't really believe it, and I think showing people that they do believe it is really significant. Which brings me to your work on. In terms of engaging Muslims at Speaker's Corner in London, the famous area, which of course I'm fairly sure Andy Bannister has cut his teeth in that environment as well back in the day. I think he was doing some work with Jay Smith, the American street evangelist to Muslims. And here is a clip. I'm going to play a 2-minute clip, which may seem quite long, but I think it's worth getting the full sense of the kind of thing that Bob is involved in for you listeners who may be unaware of what this confrontational style involves. So I'm just going to jump in. It's from a video which I'll put in the show notes called Dawa Clowns Interrupting Conversation. Bob, before we go, what is a dawa? What is dawa? What does it mean for those who wouldn't
dawa means
understand this?
invitation, and a da'i is the Muslim equivalent of an evangelist. So dawa is like the equivalent of evangelism, and a da'i is an equivalent of an evangelist. And but we call them dawagandists. And the reason why we call them dawagandists is because they often deal in half-truths or misperceptions or outright lies, both about Islam and about Christianity. You mentioned something about your own interactions with Muslims that I wanted to pick up on, which is that they often look at the West and say that's Christian. And so it's a necessary thing for us as Christians to separate ourselves from the West, the modern liberal West, the Enlightenment West, as a way of adjusting our position vis-a-vis the Ummah and vis-a-vis the Western society as a whole. And that's really important that we contrast ourselves as much to the West as we do to Muslims.
Yeah, that's really important. I mean, funnily enough, when it's actually at Christmas time, you often see Muslims giving out anti-incarnation flyers, and I would count some at Leicester Square doing that. Who seem to think everyone at Leicester Square is going around thinking about the incarnation when they see all the Christmas lights everywhere. They go, no, I'm not. Okay, guys, you're kind of misperceiving here what's going on. These people are not really celebrating the incarnation. They're just celebrating consumerism under a kind of inherited, vaguely Christian veneer. But anyway, let's get into this clip.
Can I just jump in on that as well? Because the thing is that actually does serve a purpose. Because if you've never thought about this topic before, and the first opinion that you ever hear, the first time you ever hear about the incarnation is through a series of criticisms about the incarnation, then when someone comes to you with the Christian message, you've now got a little bit of a what we call you're a little bit immunized against the Christian message. You're more likely to try and argue against it or reject it because now you know a bit of information. And so actually, it is an effective strategy what they're doing to evangelize like that, even though the people reading the leaflets aren't Christians at all.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, that's exactly the issue that we're facing, because and trying to clarify those nuances and distinctions that may not be immediately perceived is really, really key. So I'll refrain from adding more comments because I keep inciting in more conversation, which is really good and helpful. But I'm going to jump into this clip now, which is you engaging with Muslims at Speaker's Corner and finding yourself basically kind of interrupted. So actually the video is called Dawa Clowns Interrupting Conversation. The Siraj Circus Comes to Bob is the video on YouTube, which I'll put in the show notes. But here's a 2-minute clip that will play you at this point.
I'm having a conversation with this brother, and then I'm going to have a debate with this brother, and then, I'm going to debate you. What did I say you would do? I said if I challenged him to a debate, he would run away, and now he's running away. He's running away. He's saying Siraj is my spokesman. Right, Siraj, go away, you child. Go away, child. Go back to your mother and ask her what manners look like, Siraj. Go away, 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 Siraj.
Go on.
Right, brother.
He doesn't want
Brother,
to. I'm here.
right.
I'm here.
Let me show you. Let me show you. Go away,
He
Siraj.
runs away from
Go
me.
away, Siraj. Brother,
He runs
brother.
away from me.
Let me show you. Let me show you this passage. Let me show you this passage.
Show me.
Let me show you this passage. Brother, let me show you this passage. Let me, brother. Let me show you this passage. Let me show you. I'll tell you what. When Siraj is not here, no. Brother, I was trying to tell you something. He interrupted. No. Let me finish. No. All right. Right. Have a good day, brother. Have a good day. Have a good day. God bless you. No, it's.
Right. There we go. Yeah. So one of the reasons I mean, again, it's kind of insane how long you went on in that, and that's kind of why some may be listening to that going, does he need to go on that long? But there was something actually kind of comical and quite appealing in the way you were actually able to win the crowd over, it seemed, at kind of seeing what this guy was doing. So do you want to just kind of fill in what's going through your mind when you're doing that? What's your kind of approach? How that relates to previous experiences you've had maybe with that guy in particular or similar? Just give us a kind of filling in what the kind of context is there.
Yeah, I'd want to start off though by saying I don't think for anyone who doesn't understand Speaker's Corner that that's the best clip to play for them. I don't think that is particularly informative. You know, the thing is, Siraj, firstly, Speaker's Corner is a pretty unique kind of place. It's not it's not like a street corner. You know, behavior occurs at Speaker's Corner that just well, you would think and you would hope that it wouldn't occur.
It's got unique laws, hasn't it? There are laws around Speaker's Corner that don't apply elsewhere.
Well, there are legal precedents connected to Speaker's Corner that don't apply elsewhere. So, you know, and so for that reason, you can say things at Speaker's Corner that you couldn't say on the street 500 meters away from Speaker's Corner. And the thing is, it draws in a regular crowd of evangelists, dawagandists, and you know, other kinds of folk that just come on a regular basis. Siraj is pretty much a newcomer to the corner. He's been there enough now that you would consider him a regular, but he's just someone who's incapable of having a conversation. He interrupts consistently. He doesn't pay attention to the points. He doesn't follow the conversation. And no matter what you say to him, he just continues on whatever thing he wanted to say, and he doesn't engage with you at all. And so for that reason, I just don't talk to him. But he will often, when I'm talking to other people and having a much more sensible, intelligent an articulate conversation will come in and just interrupt and break that down. And that was causing some trouble. And so I've had to find ways to try and change his behavior. And what you heard there was a way to try and tackle his behavior, one of various different strategies that I've used. And you know, I finally found one that works. And the Dawagandists that interrupt me leave me alone now. And I'm able to have much more intelligent conversations with people without interruption, because they know if they interrupt me, I'm going to go and interrupt their key speakers. And their key speakers hate being interrupted by me, so they put pressure on people like Siraj to leave me alone. You know, and the thing is that a lot of Christians will, in a very simplistic way, think that is an unchristian sort of behavior.
Impolite. It's not the kind of thing you get in an alpha course. Let's put it.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, Speaker's Corners are not a polite place. There's assaults and attacks there every single week. People have. There's been a terrorist attack there that was covered up by the mainstream media. No one knows about it, but there was a terrorist attack there by Islamists who tried to murder someone there. There's regular threats of murder and violence there. The police don't do anything. They don't protect anyone. They just let it all happen. And all of this is kind of anathema to the ears of nice middle-class people, because they still think the system works. They still think the system protects them. But, you know, you've got to think of Speaker's Corner as a bit like an inner city enclave of working class at its worst, but also weirdly at its best, because people are coming from working class backgrounds because they want to learn. These are not people that are going to darken the doors of an alpha course. And there are millions of people watching these videos on YouTube. And so we're using social media to reach Muslims in their bedrooms, in their homes, in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in Pakistan, in India. Like there's a guy there's a brother who I'm in touch with who's become a Christian, and we've Zoomed at least once, and we trying to keep in touch is difficult, but he's become a Christian in the Middle East through watching our videos. Last night in a Zoom meeting, one of my covenant partners said that her and her two daughters, who are all Muslim, have converted to Christianity through watching these videos. And so using social media allows us to reach Muslims in ways that is far harder to do if you go into a Muslim area.
Yeah.
Because a lot of, again, nice middle-class white English folk just don't understand the communal nature of the Muslim community, and they don't understand the honor culture. And so they don't understand that it's not seemly, and nor is it wise, nor is it safe to show too much interest publicly in Christianity. It can cause you troubles. It can cause you trouble in your home. It can cause you trouble with your neighbors. It can cause you trouble in your family. I know a sister who has sadly apostatized. You know, like she received incredible duress from her family when she became a Christian. They were really upset. I know another sister who is a Christian still, but her family have rejected her and have nothing more to do with her because she's become a Christian. I know another brother who, when him and his entire family became Christian, the Muslim community, or elements of the Muslim community, started vandalizing his home, attacking his property, harassing him in every conceivable way, including trying to set fire to his house, and then in an attempted murder. And he was saved by a Sikh. Now, the point is, nice, and that last example, the Archbishop of Canterbury, when he was when this confessor of the faith spoke to him, turned his back on this Muslim Christian, this Christian from a Muslim background, turned his back on him, saying, "Oh, we've done all that we can do," which was basically nothing at all. And the reason why they can do nothing is because they're just nice, civil, polite people who can only think in nice, civil, polite ways. And the moment a problem arises that's outside of that nice, comfortable world, they've got no solutions. They've got no responses. And so the truth is, using social media is one of the key ways to evangelize Muslims. You know, because you're reaching them in the privacy of their own home when they're sat on their own, and then they're not, as it were, in the clear sight of their own community. If we want to see large numbers of Muslims become Christians, then something needs to change politically and economically and socially in this country to remove those self-appointed leaders of the community who have a stranglehold over the Muslim community. If you want to de-Islamify the Muslim community and you want to Christianize it and you want to see large numbers get baptized, something's got to change in the politics and the economics first, or in the culture first.
In the Islamic culture, that is, in
our culture,
in our culture,
liberal Western society, you've got to crack down on the grip that Islamists and those who sort of lean towards the Islamists have a grip over the community and make it hard for Muslims to show interest or to leave Islam. You know, we've also, as the church, we've also got to create the kind of infrastructure and support networks that anyone who shows interest in Christianity or becomes a Christian is properly supported. We've got to help them get a job. We've got to help them get a wife or a husband. We've got to help them find a home, because normatively for them, their community would help them achieve all of those goals.
Yeah, it's a huge addition. It reminds you of some of those emphases in the early church, which we like to speak about in general. Like, oh, look, wasn't it great that the church in Acts is caring for one another's needs? But when in these really significant missional situations where someone's having to cross over a kind of Rubicon in order to become a Christian, which for many people in a Christianized middle class culture, that isn't quite the same thing. You can carry on looking quite similar in the kind of job you have, the family setup you have. As you say, for a Muslim, huge ostracizing, and we're used to hearing these stories from Saudi Arabia or Yemen or something. But actually, as you say, there's persecution within British Islam, which can seem different to people, because I think people tend to think, Muslims in Britain are a little bit softer. They're not likely to be as radical as some of those we may see or hear about in other contexts. But I'm guessing you're coming across those who really are. And would you say that those Muslims, like the ones you're dealing with, the Sirajas of this world and those on Speaker's Corner, are they representative of a significant swathe of Islam, or is there, because there is a softened Islam, isn't there, where people are sort of more westernized?
Yeah, I
think
think
other communities.
I think yeah, it's important that we make a distinction, and it is an important one, because all the research that I've read indicates that hardcore Islamists only represent about 3% of the Muslim population. But 3% of 4 million people is still tens of thousands of people, you know. So we're talking about a town's worth of hardcore Islamists inside the UK. But then on top of that hardcore, upwards of 30% have significant overlap with Islamists, even if they're not Islamists themselves. They might just be called traditionalists or hardline conservatives or conservatives. And then above that 30%, you get a decreasing sort of commitment, a decreasing kind of identification with Islamist narratives. And then it goes into a sweeping, and I'm more guessing here than sure, but I would think that about 40% of Muslims are probably just cultural Muslims. So their interactions with Islam is at the cultural level. Bit like the UK used to be maybe in the 1950s or 1940s. It's a cultural Christianity, or it's a cultural Islam. But it's stronger than what we would now call cultural Christianity. You know. But the problem is that at any point in time, any of those cultural Muslims could just tap into the narratives that lead to radical Islam, because they're all there in the Quran and they're all there in the hadiths. So at any point, so the liberal Westerners are often confused, like, how did he radicalize so fast? Well, it's because he read the Quran and he decided to believe it, or he read the hadiths and he decided to take them seriously. And that's why the radicalization can happen very quickly. But so we mustn't think that 100% of Muslims are radical, because they're not. And we mustn't think that 100% of Muslims are pro-Islamization and Sharia law, because they're not. But even amongst cultural Muslims, if you press them, many of them will just adopt what culturally they're aware they need to say. So they'll say things like, I'm in favor of Sharia law. And then you say, but Sharia law is in favor of killing people because they've become Christians. And then they'll go, no, it isn't.
Yeah.
It's because they don't actually know what Sharia law teaches.
Yeah.
But they'll still say they're in favor of Sharia law. They just don't know what Sharia law teaches.
As you say, there's many people who, funnily enough, culturally defend Christianity. There's people on the sort of center right today. Christianity is starting to get a little bit more popular among many. There's that whole podcast Justin Brierley does, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, where people are starting to say, hey, Western culture is in decline. Where did we get our values? Oh, they were Christianity. Let's get some Christian values back. But really, they don't know what's really there. They if you started to actually teach them what's in the Bible, like your experience in Oxford. Look, there's a passage about head coverings. How do you interpret it? What do you do with it? Oh, I believe that we should actually have them. You're not allowed to believe that anymore. You're not allowed to believe this about homosexuality. You can't say that. That's outrageous. But we like the general values. As you say, it's the same thing, presumably, with Islam, where it's like, well, yeah, I like this version of Islam is peace. But there's some nice stuff, the kind of stuff Justin Welby waxes lyrical about. Look at these wonderful festivals. Look at the moral values. Look at their commitment to family, which is better than many progressive Westerners, which is true. And yet, despite the fact there's common grace and there's good things you can praise in different cultures, there are also things where they're going to be, because of that culture, because it's so all-encompassing, it's going to put a kind of blockage on the ability of them to even hear our nice gospel message, because they're going to say, that's very nice for you, but obviously I can't convert. It would be completely radically different to my entire life. So I guess that's why those situations that you're engaging in, when you're right there at speaker's corner, like in that situation, you're actually, I think, demonstrating something. It's interesting what you say about social media, because you've got a kind of two things going on simultaneously. There's almost a sense of you're being filmed, but I don't get a sense that you're performing for the camera. It does seem like you barely have time for that, really, because there's so much chaos and you're kind of trying to keep the conversations going. And it's a blessing, I think, that such good audio and video content can be beamed out to others while you can just get on with what you're doing, which is pretty authentic in the moment. But you're trying to reach these people for whom the implications of them being reached is just phenomenal. And as you say, the irony is that it seems like there's a kind of winsomeness to your unwinsomeness. In the way that you're telling someone off for not having the right manners, to go back to your mother. We would never do that, because we'd say, what an offensive, unchristian thing to say, as you say. But you're actually more winsome than people would think, right? You are seeing fruit.
Dude, like, brother, every single week I am getting emails from people who are saying that I've either become a Christian and I was never a Christian. I was a Christian, stopped being a Christian, and now I've come back to the faith. I am not a Christian, but I've started reading the Bible. I'm not a Christian, but I would like to go to church. Or I used to be a Muslim and now I'm a Christian. Or I was thinking about becoming a Muslim, but now I'm not becoming a Muslim because of you. So, like, this works. And I want to explain why it works. When people encounter me, they know I'm serious. They know I'm committed. They know that I'm not a pushover, that I'm not weak, that I'm not easily intimidated, that I am confident that Christianity is the right answer, actually, that I am confident that Jesus Christ is the Lord and our King, and he's more important than democracy, and he's more important than the United Nations, and he's more important than the EU, and he's more important than the Parliament, and he's more important than multiculturalism, and he's more important than the civil peace, and he's more important than getting along, you know. And so because they feel all of that, there's something solid that they can respect. Because both because people, particularly people on the political right or the cultural right of our society, one of the as well as many Muslims who also are on the political right and the cultural right, they respect strength. You know, one of the Dawah who's very famous down at the corner, turned around and he said, you know, that they respect me. You know, and he said it whilst launching into a barbed criticism, you know, saying that I ignored Jesus's turn the other cheek kind of teaching, and that's why he respects me. But the truth is, he's using for that polemic, he's using a characterization of what Jesus means by turn the other cheek. But because they know that I'm serious, they take me seriously. And that's what's missing in the church today. We don't take our own faith. We don't demonstrate that we're taking our own faith seriously in sufficient numbers. And because because we're not seen to be taking our faith seriously, people don't respect the Christian message. Now, I want to be clear. It's not that there aren't lots of really committed Christians who are going to the wall for the faith. There really are. There's lots of them. Right? You know, go and look at Christian Concern's caseload. There's loads of Christians going to the wall for their faith. Loads of Christians are taking their faith seriously. But because we're so spread out, it's one person in Blackpool, and it's one person in Lincoln, and it's another person in Swansea. These individual stories just don't have the kind of traction that it would do if you put all of them into the same town, and all of them together were protesting outside of a school pushing trans ideology to children. Whereas because Muslims live closer together, they've got maybe slightly more activist Muslims, and I'll explain why in a second. But they're hardcore committed Muslims are probably about the same percentage level as they are amongst Christians, but they're more concentrated. And because they're more concentrated, it means that when they do something, it looks like a crowd of people are doing it. And when they do something, because of the natural way of human relationships, they're able to activate people who maybe a few months ago weren't as committed, but get drawn into some activity that makes them more committed. And so it appears that Muslims are more committed than Christians. But actually, it's just that the committed Christians are so spread out, their saltiness is not very salty.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, as Jesus, of course, says, if the salt has lost its saltiness, it's good for nothing. It'll be trampled. And actually, we are seeing Christianity being eroded in our time, and we are seeing many Christians who would probably pray for revival and would love to see a return to Christianity at large in the culture, but
won't do anything to bring it about.
Squeamish, genuinely would not only not do anything to bring it about, but seemingly doing things that will actively ensure that it won't be brought about, almost standing in the way of it. If you think of the Great Awakening and the kind of passion and zeal of Wesley and Whitefield, Howell Harris and others, who were so willing to go beyond the accepted established norms, to go to the highways and byways, as Wesley said, to make themselves, as David said, undignified before those around them. It's not obviously just, I mean, there's ways that we can lionize only those dramatic moments of courage, or the things that people like you are doing on at Speaker's Corner, on social media, etc. But at the same time, somehow we need to be able to show that we really mean business, that we really are committed. As you say, that's a huge apologetic in itself to Muslims, who, especially those who are committed. I mean, why should they bother thinking about the radical difference that it would mean to them to become a Christian if it doesn't look all that different anyway, and people aren't all that bothered about it in the first place. So it's a huge, huge issue. But I guess one of the kind of last thing I was going to ask you about
Well,
was
just before you,
there's probably a couple of things. Oh yeah, go on. You jump back on me, and I'll bring these
yeah,
last two.
because I think it's really important for Christians to start evangelizing and to pivot our evangelism very deliberately to the right.
Yeah.
To the right
Yeah.
of politics, to the right of culture, because there's a lot of people on the right who are now so alarmed and so distressed by the extreme alt left, this takeover of our institutions and society, is that they're now asking the right kind of questions, the kind of questions that make someone think seriously about Jesus, our Lord. And so we should pivot our evangelism very deliberately to those people, but we shouldn't emasculate them when they come into the church.
Yeah.
We need in the church to create a space for masculine energy, so that masculine energy can be used productively rather than just channeled down into yet another prayer meeting and yet another devotional meeting. It needs to be something more than just prayer. And when it comes to reaching Muslims, until either the church changes or we manage to change the politics, culture, and economy of our society in a way that deals with the increasing grip of the Islamists over the Muslim community, the church is going to be relegated to saving those people, those Muslims who are already on the edges of the Muslim world. If you want your evangelism to have any kind of success as it currently is in our society, you need to be looking for the people whose lives are already broken in some way, so that, you know, because of either divorce or family problems or addiction or joblessness, or it's the people on the edges of the Muslim community already that are the people most likely, i.e. the non-practicing Muslims, they're the most likely ones to come in to our faith. We often think that we need to find the most Muslim of Muslims to evangelize that Muslim that's like super Muslim, right? That's the wrong, right? Forget that Muslim. He's too integrated into his community. What you need to be focusing on is the Muslims on the edges of the Muslim community, the ones that aren't wearing the hijab, the ones that aren't going to the mosque 5 times a day, the ones that aren't fasting during Ramadan.
But equally, presumably challenging the ones who are radical will also help to reach those who are on the fringes, right? So you wouldn't say ignore them. You actually, you go with them.
But it's the way that you do it. It's the way that you do it. And so particularly on social media, that's a great place to do it. Because there is a narrative paradigmic battle being fought in the culture, and it's being fought through social media about how Islam is perceived, how Christianity is perceived, and about which one of these two religions are true, which is where apologetics and polemics are coming into their own. And particularly Christians need to be active on social media, because lots of young Muslims and Muslims are generationally younger than the church in the West. They're on social media. They're active on social media, and that's where we've got to be if we want to reach them.
Absolutely. I mean, arguably, Twitter, obviously, I frequent, and having not been very involved in social media for many years. I mean, only very vaguely, but realizing that it's really the modern day agora. It is the equivalent of Paul going and debating in the marketplace, or Speaker's Corner specifically. The more aggressive confrontations you get in different platforms is really key. As you say, it is, you can say, hey, I'm going to keep out of it, but actually, and keep my my powder dry or my nose clean. And actually, you can do that, but actually there are people who are there to be won. And Paul does say, be all things to all men. And we've been willing to reach the left because that's where the power has been. That's where the elites have been. And even people listening to this will be going, oh, I don't like the fact that he said reach the right. Like, well, why? What is it in your soul, in your heart that says,
don't
I don't want to reach
Nazis
these
need
people?
Jesus?
Exactly. I don't want to reach people because their views are too mean. Well, Paul said, "Be all things to all men." Did he say all men, or did he say the men that actually are
respectable to the
socially
middle?
conventional?
who are socially respectable.
Exactly. So there's two things before we close. I wanted to ask you.
I mean, I'm happy to go a bit longer. I'm not rushed. If you've
it's
got
fine.
more time.
It's more
I don't
that
want to
I'll
rush.
It's fine. It's more I'll have the masculine energy of my son banging on the door. Some listeners may have heard, so I need to go and rescue him in a moment. But it's I'll ask you a more personal question at the end. But let me ask you this one just briefly. You mentioned there the paradigmatic battle that kind of we've got ahead of us. And one of those is the reassertion of Christendom. We've talked about civic Christianity being a problem. Christendom did bring problems of people nominally thinking they're Christian when they're not. That is a problem. And yet we need a kind of recovery of what was good about Christendom. What did Christianity birth in the culture? And what I've often noticed in some of your apologetics is that you're very well versed in historical details that I have no idea about. Maybe Andy Bannister might, with his PhD in Quranic studies. But
this is why our Lord took him out of this
exactly.
podcast. So there was no argument.
Exactly, you'd argue. But I'm kind of amazed.
Note, Andy. Take note of the signs.
Exactly. But that's the thing. Like I see some of the interactions, and you're recounting certain battles that occurred. You're talking about certain things that happened, not just in the Quran, but it's very easy to go, hey, conceptually, here's the Quran, here's the Bible, let's go at it with arguments. I've seen you do that. But I've also seen, here's how Christian culture did this or that in opposing Muslims, even talking about the Crusades, even talking about some of these areas that we don't like to speak about. So would you say say something about that approach, what your kind of study is like in that, and how you'd encourage others who are thinking about reaching Muslims to know their history and why it matters to contemporary mission, if that makes sense?
Yeah, history is of absolute and fundamental importance. And one of the effects of the Enlightenment and liberalism is that it has caused Christians to forget that they have a 2,000-year history. Now, my beloved and much loved Reformed brothers and sisters sometimes fall into the trap of thinking that Christianity started about 400 years ago, 500 years ago. Or is it 600? Am I getting there? So
500, 1517.
Yeah, 1517. So yeah, about 500 and something years ago. But the fact is, Christianity is 2,000 years old, and the church was promised by Christ that it would never be overcome by the gates of hell. And that church that Jesus Christ founded is still here today. And we are part of that church. And so that history helps us to frame our present. If we understand our history, if we know how we got here into the mess that we're in, then we can trace a route out of the mess that we're in. But it's having an appreciation of history, because the church has been in worse positions than it is right now before. Like, the church has really been in worse positions than right now. Right now is difficult. Right now is kind of pre-Constantine sort of persecution. But that means that the church is still pretty strong. You know, it just doesn't know its own strength, and it doesn't know how to marshal its own strength or use its own strength, because it's so divided and because it's so ignorant. Just let this settle on yourself, Aaron, and all of your viewers. There has not been a single year for the last 1,400 years in which some Islamic army has not marched somewhere against some Christian population to kill, rape, pillage, and destroy. Not one year.
Wow.
A lot of Christians don't recognize that. But if you do recognize that, then the Islamist movement looks different from the liberal narrative. Because now it's not just a bunch of people misunderstanding their religion. It's quite arguably people understanding their religion. You know? And so history helps us to frame the present. And if we surrender history to our opponents, they will frame our present in a way that suits them. And final 3 points, is that if we say Jesus is Lord, which we do, and we believe in the kingdom of God, which should be on earth as it is in heaven, then that means that we're committing ourselves to organizing society around discipleship in Jesus Christ. And if you're talking about organizing society around discipleship in Jesus Christ, you are talking about a new Christendom.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we might debate about what that looks like. We might, I certainly don't want to replicate everything from Christendom 0.10,
Yeah.
like 1.0. I don't, 1.0. I don't want to replicate all of that into the modern world.
Yeah.
I think but I think there are things we can learn from it. But Christians, as we throw off the entrapment of the Enlightenment, Christians have to recognize that we are committed to building a Christendom 2.0. Christendom 2.
Yeah.
And if you don't believe in creating a Christendom 2, you're either denying that Jesus is Lord, or you're denying that the kingdom of God should be on earth as it is in heaven. So which are you denying? Let's debate it. Let's see if your position is biblical.
Yeah, absolutely. Lord's Prayer. I mean, we like to pray the Lord's Prayer, but would we actually do anything towards walking in the direction of those prayers? Exactly. What if God actually answered those prayers? So so just to come in the close, it's really great to hear all the stuff you've been saying, and I want to ask you a more personal question.
I might not be able to answer a personal question.
We'll see. But there'll be people listening who go, well, yeah, okay, Bob's very strong in his faith, very strident, very knows what he believes, and is aware of his strengths in how God is using him in these ways. How, in that sense, how would you speak to a Christian who could see that as a potential pitfalls there for you, because you're out there as the kind of John the Baptist voice, or some might see you that way, in terms of pride coming in? How do you deal against pride, or indeed against the need to actually be weak so that we can be made strong in Christ? Because some would look at strength and they see go away Siraj, or they see stridence or combativeness and go, that person must be very arrogant. They must really not have any kind of inner life. They must have no prayerful dependence upon God. So just say a little bit about your own devotional life, the way that how prayer does affect and impact the way that you are able to then go and do the things you do. Anything along those kind of pious areas would be helpful.
Yeah, I often, when I'm discipling new converts or Christians who are just not being discipled by their fellowships, I'll often talk about the disciplines, the discipline of prayer, the discipline of fasting, the discipline of almsgiving, the discipline of being integrated into the community, the discipline of self-examination, the discipline of evangelism, the discipline of keeping your word, practicing hospitality. There's some others that I've lost, but I'd get them back if I thought about them a bit more. And I do try to embody these in my own life. And at different phases in my own life, I've used different kinds of prayers, meditative prayers or practices. I mean, I have to confess that I'm not the best person at prayer. I'm a much more active person than a contemplative person. But I consistently, I'm very aware of my own sin. I have to remind people that they only see a certain narrow spectrum of me through YouTube videos. And I make it a matter of public record that I struggle with all the same sins that everybody else does. So if you've got me on a pedestal, make sure it's a very small one. Because I think sometimes Christians fall into the trap of thinking that public Christians are somehow holier than them.
Yeah.
And that's not true. I mean, I think most of us would fail in many aspects of our lives if it was scrutinized. And so, I believe in the practice of confession, and confessing our sins to one another. And I think that helps to keep you humble when you recognize your own sin and your own failings. Like I long ago got past any desire to perform for the camera. Like that's definitely not there. And I believe that you should be as gentle as the circumstances allow you to be.
Yeah.
And one of the great images that actually help to encapsulate this is what C.S. Lewis wrote about the Christian knight. And I really want to encourage everyone to go away, every man at least, to go away and read what C.S. Lewis wrote about the Christian knight. And to put it in summary form, it's this: that the Christian knight is to be as familiar and as comfortable with the cracking of skulls and the bludgeoning of bodies as he is dainty and gentle before a lady. A Christian should be both hard and incredibly soft, not some kind of balance between the two, but he must be hard to the nth degree, and he must be soft to the nth degree. And it's the circumstances that decide whether you're soft or hard and how soft or hard you are. But you should be both incredibly humble and incredibly gentle, and embody that as much as you can, and incredibly strong and incredibly powerful, and embody that as much as you can. And your circumstances decide which side of you comes out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, really, really helpful. Yeah, absolutely. I've certainly heard versions of that before, in terms of that need not to just be a medium balance on things, but actually just to focus on the contextual differences. And I think people, again, would see one side of anyone doing that kind of ministry and go, that must be what it's like all the time. But actually, they don't see the full orb spectrum. So it's really helpful to hear you share that. I should really, I will close in a moment. Let one tiny thing just came to mind.
Keep going. I'm yours for as long as you need me.
And if Andy was here, I'm sure he would probably ask a question of how does reaching Muslims, how would it apply, some of these things you've been saying apply to women who are wanting to reach Muslims? Because of course you mentioned there, I'd challenge men to do this, and we're talking about the importance of this combative masculine energy. There aren't many examples of women. There's Hatton Tash, of course, who was, you may be able to speak into her situation. There's people who have been involved in evangelism who are women to Muslims, but it looks very different. Is there anything that comes to mind for you in terms of applications for women in reaching Muslims today?
Okay, yeah, but I want to make a comment to the men first, which is that the kind of combative things that you see me do at Speaker's Corner, I don't advise that you do them yourself on the street.
Yes, yeah.
But what I do advise is that you learn apologetics and polemics, and you learn how to stand your ground in an argument. Yeah. And that your ability to stand your ground in an argument extends to your knowledge of history, politics, culture, and society as well. But Speaker's Corner is kind of a unique place. The behaviors at Speaker Corner shouldn't really be replicated outside of Speaker's Corner. And actually, it's a failure of policing that Speaker's Corner has descended into the morass that it has, unfortunately.
But opportunities as well.
But no, it's brilliant for reaching out to Muslims and for a wider audience. It's through the social media. With regards to women, like, and this first statement applies also to men, is that if you're a woman and you approach a Muslim man, amongst a significant number of Muslim men, they're going to see that as you going, hey, you want to get married to me, you want to live loose, you want to maybe do the naughty. Do you know? It's kind of like you're going to have some of those assumptions being put upon you. And many Muslim men will not be used to a woman speaking to them as an equal. Muhammad made some very derogatory comments about the intelligence of women, and these are imbibed amongst a section of the Muslim community that tap into those hadiths. And so my advice, but it's also very difficult for me as a man to reach Muslim women. It's very difficult. I do speak to them because they contact me and I talk to them. So my advice is, if you're a Christian woman, reach out to Muslim women, because it is very difficult for a Christian man to reach a Muslim woman. And you'll find that Muslim women are very different from Muslim men. You know, that it'll be much more relational. than dialogue
Mhm.
or monologue. There will be Muslim women that want to engage you in those debates, so you still need to use apologetics.
Yeah.
But I would advise everyone who decides to get more involved in reaching out to Muslims is to make sure that you're emotionally secure, right? Because let's face it, a lot of our fellowships aren't very good at being fellowships, and we often don't have all of our emotional needs met inside of our fellowships, or in our lives. A lot of our emotional needs are not met. And the moment a Dawagandist learns and identifies that emotional weakness within you, they will use it to try to draw you into Islam. So all of you should make sure that your heart is guarded, for it is the wellspring of life. And you know, don't go into this emotionally vulnerable. Don't go into this intellectually ignorant. And particularly for the men, toughen up, learn, go to the gym, do some exercise, like be a man, as it says in scripture.
Muscular Christianity.
Yeah. And as for ladies, you know, like, you do not need to replicate men in your engagement with anyone. You know, and the thing is, you know, the opportunity to reach Muslim women is very difficult for Christian male evangelists. So we need women to step forward to reach out to Muslim women.
Yeah.
You know, but you need to make sure that you're not emotionally vulnerable, that you're not intellectually out of shape, and that you're not physically out of shape. You know, one final point, especially for those of you that might get involved more in social media, is there is a risk involved in evangelizing Muslims, which is that when you become successful, you start to fall onto the radar of radical Muslims. Intimidation can occur. Intimidation does occur. Violence can occur. Violence does occur. The state is not going to protect you. All those things that you think are there to look after you are not going to be there, because as far as the liberal establishment is concerned, you're a nuisance. You know. And that's why the church needs to get its act together, because we need to be able to protect and look after our own. And also we need to be able to protect and look after any Muslim who wants to join the new covenant and wants to join the people of God.
And wonderful. So helpful in the way you brought that together then, and the whole holistic sense in which we need to be preparing ourselves and being in community as the church on mission for his kingdom. So thanks so much, Bob. It's been so helpful and really good to talk to you, and I hope it's been helpful to you listeners as well. You can go and find Bob on Twitter. We'll put his Twitter handle there, and you can go and look up his video on videos, many videos of him on YouTube, and please go and support him as well if you feel so inclined, and to pray for his ministry, of course. And of course, any of you who've been stirred by anything, please send us your questions and comments about this, as we obviously would love to hear from our listeners. But we'd love you to be prayerfully considering these things. This is a huge issue. Bob's raised some really, really important things today, which are going to affect mission, regardless of whether you see yourself as someone who wants to reach Muslims or not. They're going to want to reach the culture that you are in. They're going to want to reach you in one way or another. And so it's something the church really needs to get hold of. So thank you again, Bob, for your time with us. And we hope that God continues to bless your ministry and how you reach Muslims today.
Well, thank you very much for having me on, Aaron. And I hope to return the favor and have maybe you guys on my channel to do a chat and a conversation on something else in the near future.
Wonderful, thanks. Well, I thought you were going to say, I'd love to invite you and Andy to come down to Speaker's Corner and join me as I take on the void.
That's an open invitation. We can all go to church together. We can get breakfast, and then we'll go to the corner together, and we'll go and have some fun. That'd be great. That'd be great.
You can school us.
That is an open invitation. I just want to shamelessly plug my own channel, which is Bob of Speaker's Corner. And I just want to point out that even though I appear on Soko Films and Revelation 22, two other YouTube channels, which I encourage you to subscribe to, I'm not funded or supported by those channels in any way. I'm only supported through Bob of Speaker's Corner. Thank you very much, Aaron. Peace be with you, brother.
God bless you, Bob.
I hope you have a very merry Easter.
Thank you. You too. You too. And you too, listeners. Farewell until next time. We'll see you soon for another episode of Pod of the Gaps. Farewell.
God bless.